For the very latest on developments in Ukraine, we're going to cross live to Lviv, where AP reporter Kieran McQuillan is now waiting for us. Kieran, let's start with the latest from the front line. A pretty dire warning from the mayor of Sloviansk. He's urging residents to flee the city. Appears capturing that city as Moscow's next target.
That's right, Anil. This really has now become the city, the focus of Russian bombardment. We heard from Denis Pushilin. He's the leader of the breakaway Donetsk People's Republic, and he was saying that Russian forces, along with his armies and some mercenaries, are now moving further into the Donbass region. Now, basically, to give you the breakdown here, 75% of the Donbass, which is made up of two provinces, Luhansk and Donetsk, that is now controlled by Russian forces. The Ukrainians hold on to 45% of the Donetsk, so that's that 25% chunk of the Donbass still in Ukrainian hands, and that is the prime objective now of President Putin and the Russian forces down there. We did hear from Vadim Lyak today, the mayor. We now know that the death toll is 2 and 7 people injured after a rocket attack on a busy market this morning in the city of Sloviansk. We understand that 144 people left the city today as he urged people to get out. He was telling them to do this yesterday as well. Among those 144, Anil, are 20 children. And we also know that yesterday from Vadim Lyak that 40 houses were put on fire by this bombardment, this constant shelling. This is the worst shelling the city has experienced since 2014. And it's interesting to note about Sloviansk, it was one of the first places that the Russians and those separatists from the Donetsk People's Republic occupied in the very early days of that first Russian incursion back in 2014. They managed to rout those forces at that time. So this would be a very symbolic city for the Russians and for the Donetsk separatists to take. But there's a couple of assessments coming through now about just how well supplied Russia is and what they lost trying to take the Luhansk. We know that last Sunday there was an order given by the Kremlin to take the Luhansk region by last Sunday. They did it by this Sunday, so a week later than they expected to. So they poured everything into this. We understand that from one military analyst here, who's quite well respected, that 60%, perhaps up to that amount, of the Russians who are on this in a very vast front line, Anil, stretches from Kharkiv in the north, 800 kilometers to Kherson in the south. 60% of them concentrated on trying to just capture this one oblast in these two cities, Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. And are the Russians on the roll through here? Well, we just don't know. We just don't know what the levels of attrition. We don't know the casualty figures. We don't know how many tanks or weapons are destroyed. We just have no idea about the Russian supply lines. But we do know that the Ukrainians yesterday disrupted and destroyed 4 what they say are Russian ammunition sites, trying to disrupt the supplies, the flow of weapons and artillery into that region.
And Kieran, you mentioned Lysychansk. Tell us what you're hearing from that city. We know Russian forces captured that city on Sunday. People are now leaving shelters after taking cover for so many days. I suppose they're seeing the devastation for themselves up close now.
Well, of the citizens that are left, we understand that, in the city of Lysychansk itself, there was only 10% of the population left. Many of them, are the disadvantaged, the old, the elderly, the poor, those just who don't have the means or don't have family members, maybe here in the western part of Ukraine where it's a little bit safer to come and stay with. Now, there's some amazing footage that has appeared, and very heart-rendering actually if you think about it, on Russian state television, including drone footage where you see the drones flying over the entire devastation. There's been this scorched earth policy by the Russians. They've destroyed 90% of the infrastructure in this city and its city of Severodonetsk on the other side of the river, its sister city. You must wonder what those citizens are going to do now. Now, we did see in those pictures some women coming up from the shelters. They were welcoming the Russian soldiers. They were saying, thank God, we were waiting for you to come. But, there are of course Russian speakers who are pro-Russian and sympathetic to the Russians, and we're waiting for them. But, most of the people have left that city. And Mariupol really is our template. This is a city of 500,000 people, before the war. It was completely devastated by Russian bombing as they came in and zeroed in on that Azovstal steelworks, down in that city. Only 20% of the population are now left. Some really dire news coming out there today. An Ukrainian lawmaker saying that only 3% of people there have access to running water, and the last 17 Russians have left. There are no doctors or nurses, apparently, no medical staff to look after these 100,000 people that are estimated to be left in the city. So you must only think about what it must be like for the citizens of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk.
It sounds pretty dire stuff there, Kieran. Now, you're in Lviv, which is, of course, in western Ukraine. You've been there for some time. What is the morale like of people there? We're now more than 4 months into this war, and yet we're seeing almost every day Russia making these incremental advances in the Donbass. How are people feeling? What's the mood like there?
I think the feeling is resignation. They're resigned to a long, grinding battle of attrition down on the front lines, which of course are nearly 1,000 kilometers away from here. So we are fairly far removed. We are actually in an arid siren situation at the moment. So we did hear we haven't heard the all clear yet, and that came in the middle of this thunderstorm, quite apocalyptic that we had earlier. But look, the people here, I've been speaking to people from Kharkiv. It was supposed to be a safe city. They'd bought tickets to go back. They thought that it was time to go back and try and rebuild their city. And day after day, there's Russian shelling coming in from Belgorod, the oblast on the other side of the border in Russia. And other people here were trying to make plans to go back to their cities, and they're just staying put here for now because they're just wary about going back and about what's next. And again, there are fears about Belarus being dragged into this war. At the weekend, we heard President Lukashenko talking about an attack by Ukrainian missiles would have been shot down. He didn't get very many details, and in fact there's a great deal of skepticism about those reports here. But the situation here, again, it's still very tense, but very, very weary. And there are a couple of little wins, shall we say, for people's morale here. For example,
Sure.
What happened in Snake Island. But yeah, there is a sense of resignation.
And Kieran, we know in Moscow, Russia's parliament has approved the first stage of laws that would allow the country to move to a war economy. How do you think this will actually impact the war in Ukraine?
Well, that's right. The Russian military, the Duma, the parliament, second reading of a bill, they have to go through a third and fourth more reading before it gets signed off by President Putin. But basically, it would compel Russian businesses to supply first to the military. That would be their first priority. Secondly, that employees of those businesses would be compelled to work longer hours, weekends, public holidays, etc., to try and supply the military. But the one thing about this whole campaign, we thought back on May the 9th that President Putin would declare this a war, and that would bring Belarus, Kazakhstan, all those other countries that are in this security cooperation into this war. Because a little bit like Article 5 in NATO, there's an Article 4 in that security and cooperation agreement which would compel them to join the war. But the Russians have avowedly refused to call this a war. It's still a special military operation, and that means that there's no means to call up or draft conscription. And that means that possibly the Kremlin is frightened of doing that, even though there is widespread sympathy towards this special military operation and the opinion polling for whatever it matters in Russia. It seems that the Kremlin is just a little bit too, there's too much trepidation
Sure.
to call this a war, and therefore to put the whole country onto a war footing. So that just gives you a little indication. What they're trying to do, they're trying to cover over their patches, as it were, with sticking plasters. They're trying to compel more retired officers to come out of retirement. They're using more of these Wagner mercenaries, Wagner Group mercenaries. That's how they're trying to keep this campaign going without an all-out war being declared by Russia against Ukraine.
And Kieran, we know the US and the West have pledged billions of dollars of military support to Kyiv, to President Zelensky. When do you think we'll see those results and those weapons being deployed in Ukraine to see the Ukraine army really push back the Russian forces?
That's right. We saw at the weekend an extra 800 million or so US dollars being pledged. The US part of that was what's called the presidential drawdown, meaning that the Department of Defense can go into its stocks and reclaim some of the equipment there. But the bulk of this was to go out into the open market and just buy weapons for Ukraine. We're seeing very sophisticated Norwegian surface-to-air missile systems, network systems that can shoot down incoming missiles. It's very important right now because we've seen these attacks on apartment complexes and in that shopping mall in Kremenchuk. It's really important that the Ukrainians get this. The other thing, we now know that these multiple launch rocket systems that the Ukrainians have asked 300 of, we now know that at least 4, maybe more HIMARS systems, they're very, very sophisticated, are in the country.
Sure.
And we know that many more of these 155mm shells are coming. We know that these weapons are coming. The Ukrainians say that they've bought a little bit of time by stalling the Russians in Lysychansk and Severodonetsk to try and get that weaponry down to the front lines where it's really, really needed.
AP reporter Kieran McQuillan, thanks so much for your time live from Lviv in western Ukraine.